You ever have one of those nights where everything's just perfect? That was my Thursday night. I'd just finished grilling burgers. The guys had shown up with a cooler full of drinks, and we were sitting around my garage poker table like we had every week for the last 6 months. Nothing wild, no loud music, no shouting, just six middle-aged men dealing cards, talking trash, and sharing a few laughs to escape life for a few hours. But that night, things were different, and I didn't see it coming. Before I go on, hit that subscribe button and like the video if you've ever had to deal with a neighborhood control freak. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Back to the game. It was around 9:30 p.m. The garage door was closed, the windows were shut. We weren't making any more noise than a living room football game. I had just pulled a full house and was collecting chips when someone banged on the garage side door. Not knocked. Banged. 3 sharp, angry hits. The room fell silent. We looked at each other. "Expecting someone?" my buddy Ray asked. "Nope," I said, standing up. When I opened the door, there she was, Deborah. If you live in a neighborhood with an HOA, you know the type. Late 50s, perfectly styled hair, dressed like she's heading to a board meeting even at night. And of course, the clipboard. Always the clipboard. Her face was already red, eyes narrowed like I'd just run over her rose bushes. "Mr. Callahan," she said, loud and theatrical, "we've received a complaint about excessive noise coming from this address." I blinked. "A complaint? It's just me and a few friends playing cards." "Regardless," she cut me off, "you are in violation of the HOA noise policy, which clearly states that gatherings creating disturbance must end by 10 p.m. "It's not even 10 yet," I said, trying to stay calm. She looked over my shoulder. "Are there alcoholic beverages being consumed?" "What does that have to do with anything?" Her smile was razor thin. "It's about safety, Mr. Callahan. About order. These types of parties tend to escalate." "It's not a party," I said. "It's poker night, and you're trespassing." "I'm performing my duties as HOA president," she replied, stepping back like I was the threat. "And I'll be filing a formal report." She turned on her heel and walked off into the night like she'd just shut down a rave. I closed the door and turned back to the table. The guys were watching me with raised eyebrows. "That who I think it was?" asked Kevin, a retired firefighter. "Yep," I said. "Queen Karen herself." We tried to keep the mood light, but the rest of the night felt off. The laughter was quieter. Everyone kept glancing at the clock. We wrapped up before 10, and after they left, I sat in the garage alone for a few minutes, the hum of the mini fridge louder than usual. I didn't sleep much that night. Next morning, I found a folded notice stuffed into my mailbox. No envelope, just paper, crammed between bills and flyers. Notice of violation, excessive noise complaint, HOA code, 14.3 date, Thursday, 8:56 p.m., filed by President Deborah G. Harper. Details: repeated disruptive noise, possible alcohol, unlawful gathering. The penalty: $250 fine, payable within 10 business days. I stared at it, stunned. Not only had she lied about the time, we were still mid-hand at 8:56, but she'd flat out fabricated half the claim. Unlawful gathering. What the hell did that even mean? I picked up the phone and called the HOA office. No answer. Went straight to voicemail. I left a message, then I walked over to the community center, closed until Monday. Typical. Over the next 2 days, I asked around, talked to my neighbor Susan, a quiet woman who lived across the street. "You too?" she said when I brought up the fine. Deborah tried to write me up for my wind chimes, said they were a disruptive melodic nuisance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Turns out Deborah had been riding high on the HOA throne for over 5 years. People were scared to challenge her because she used the rules like weapons, twisting them, bending them, creating fines and warnings out of thin air. Anyone who pushed back got hit harder. Most folks just paid the fines and kept their heads down. But I wasn't like most folks. I called my buddy Dan. He's not just a friend, he's also the county sheriff. I didn't ask for favors. I just invited him to the next poker night, and this time I made sure every little detail was by the book. Quiet, clean. No open drinks, no loud music, nothing that could give Deborah the slightest excuse. I had a feeling she wasn't done, and I was right. That whole week, I kept waiting for another shoe to drop. Deborah was the kind of person who didn't just deliver one warning and walk away. She circled. She watched. She waited for any misstep so she could pounce again, clipboard in hand like a badge of authority. But I wasn't planning to give her a single inch. By Friday, the buzz had already started around the neighborhood. Apparently, Deborah had told a few people I was hosting unlicensed events. Whatever that means. Someone even mentioned she'd started referring to my garage as a known hotspot for disorderly conduct. Give me a break. I wasn't going to let this woman turn poker night into a federal case, so I called a quick meeting with the regular guys, Kevin, Ray, Manny, Mike, and of course, Dan, the sheriff. We sat around the poker table, not for cards this time, but to talk. I'll be real with you, I told them. She's trying to shut us down. If she shows up again, I want to make sure we're squared away. No excuses. Everything clean, quiet, legal. Ray snorted. We're not exactly doing keg stands in here. No, but we all know that won't stop her, I said. Dan leaned forward. You're right to be careful. What she's doing, it's not just harassment, it's abusive position. But until we've got her crossing a real legal line, we can't push back. I nodded. Then we play her game, only better. So we planned. Saturday came, and with it, poker night. The guys showed up around 7. Everyone parked properly. No cars blocking driveways. No music. No raised voices. The garage door stayed closed. I even made sure the lights inside weren't visible from the street. It was the cleanest, quietest poker night in Willow Creek history. And at exactly 8:42 p.m., right on cue, a familiar knock hit the side door. Only this time, it wasn't just a clipboard tapping against the frame. It was the sound of flashing red and blue lights outside. I opened the door slowly, already knowing what I'd see. A patrol car sat at the curb, lights flickering quietly, and standing on the sidewalk, hands folded, expression smug as ever, was Deborah. 2 deputies stepped forward. Evening, sir, one of them said. We received a noise complaint. I didn't respond right away. I just looked past them, straight at Deborah, who gave me a little tilt of the head like she'd already won. You're welcome to come in, I said calmly, but you might want to talk to my friend first. The deputy blinked. Your friend? I stepped aside. Dan stood up from the table and walked over, badge clipped to his belt. Evening, boys, he said, casually flipping open his ID. Dan Callahan, County Sheriff. The deputies stiffened. One of them looked between Dan and me, clearly not expecting this twist. Dan gestured to the poker table. No alcohol, no noise. No more than 6 people, all adults. Everyone here is a resident. We're in full compliance with HOA rules and county ordinances. He turned to the deputy who had spoken. I'd like to know who filed the complaint. The man hesitated, then quietly said, An anonymous call. Of course. Classic Deborah. Dan nodded. You can note the visit for your report, but there's no violation here. Appreciate you coming by. The deputies exchanged looks, then walked back to their vehicle without another word. Deborah stayed frozen in place, her face twitching between rage and disbelief. She didn't say a word, just turned around and marched back to her car like she'd swallowed a lemon. I closed the door behind me and looked at the guys. Well, that was fun. Ray raised his beer, non-alcoholic, of course, and grinned. To poker night. We played for another hour, but the mood had shifted. Not tense, just focused, because now it was clear this wasn't over. Deborah hadn't expected Dan, hadn't expected the rules to be followed to the letter. She'd expected chaos or resistance or something she could twist into another violation. Instead, she got nothing. But we all knew she wouldn't quit. This woman had built her identity around control, around being the authority, the one who could ruin your weekend with a single notice in your mailbox. And the fact that she'd been publicly, politely shut down, that had to be driving her insane. By the time everyone left, it was close to midnight. I locked up the garage, shut down the lights, and sat on the porch with Dan for a while. She's not done, I said. Nope, he replied, but now she knows you're not backing down. That was the truth. I didn't know what Deborah's next move would be, but I knew mine, and this time I wasn't going to wait for her to come knocking. By Monday morning, I already knew something was up. I went to grab my mail and noticed 3 envelopes taped to my front door. Not in the mailbox, not slid under the door. Taped like a warning. All 3 bore the HOA letterhead. Inside were new violations. One for excessive evening activity, another for unauthorized parking, and the last one, my personal favorite, suspicion of unlicensed event hosting. All of them signed by Deborah Harper. No evidence, no photos, just accusations, dressed up in legal-sounding nonsense. This wasn't about poker night anymore. This was personal. I took a photo of everything, emailed it to Lisa, my attorney, and then walked over to the community board office. Not the main HOA office, just a glass cabinet bolted to a brick wall next to the tennis courts. Every complaint, event, or bulletin ended up posted there. And sure enough, Deborah had added something new. A printed memo titled, "Maintaining Peace in Our Community." It was full of passive-aggressive phrasing. We ask all residents to refrain from repeated disruptive behaviors. Certain individuals have chosen to challenge the decorum. And my favorite line, we remind everyone that rules are rules for a reason, and no one is above them. She didn't use my name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. The memo was dated Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after the failed police visit. That was it. I was done playing defense. I spent the next 2 days collecting everything. Every notice, every conversation I'd had with neighbors, every message. I knocked on doors, asked questions, and found out Deborah had been doing this for years, writing up people for things like leaving their garbage cans out for too long, kids drawing with chalk on sidewalks. One woman even got a written warning for hanging wind chimes too close to a shared fence. But here's where it got interesting. When I asked Carl, the guy 2 doors down, about his interactions with her, he told me something strange. She said she'd waived the fine if I agreed to vote her proposal through last year. HOA budget stuff. That's not just petty, that's bribery. Lisa confirmed it later that night. If she's trading fine forgiveness for votes, that's a direct abuse of office, she said. And if she's falsifying complaints, that's fraud. We started building a formal case, but I didn't stop there. I wanted the residents to know who was really pulling the strings, not just in private, but publicly. So that weekend, I printed every single violation I'd received, blew them up to poster size, put them on foam boards, and set up a display table outside the community center right before the open HOA meeting. Deborah walked in and stopped dead in her tracks. "Mr. Callahan, what is this?" She snapped, her eyes darting to the massive sign that read, "Violation for hosting poker night with a sheriff present." "Transparency," I replied calmly. The crowd started gathering, people reading, whispering, laughing. "This is highly inappropriate," she hissed. "I agree," I said. "So is filing 3 violations in 48 hours without evidence." But here we are. Before she could respond, Lisa arrived with a folder under her arm. We took our seats inside, and the meeting began. Deborah tried to carry on like nothing had happened, talking about lawn maintenance, new mulch for the playground. But the crowd wasn't with her. The energy in the room had shifted. For the first time, people were pushing back, asking questions, and then came the public comments section. I stood up. "My name is Tom Callahan. I've lived here for just under a year. In that time, I've received 7 notices from the HOA, 6 of them from Ms. Harper personally, all of them vague, none of them supported by actual evidence." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I want to show you something," I said, walking over to the side of the room and wheeling in the foam boards. "These are the complaints. Filed, posted, and signed. This one here says I was hosting unauthorized events. The event in question? Poker night in my garage. With friends, one of whom is the county sheriff." I could hear the laughs, the gasps. Another claims excessive noise, filed before 9 p.m., when we were sitting quietly with the garage door shut. "I have video, by the way." Deborah tried to interrupt, but Lisa stood up next. "My name is Lisa Grant. I'm Mr. Callahan's legal representative. We have documentation of similar actions taken against over a dozen residents, many of whom are here tonight. We're filing a formal grievance against Ms. Harper in the HOA board for violation of procedural code and abuse of authority." People started clapping. Deborah went pale. She tried to take back control, raising her voice, calling for order, but no one was listening anymore. The dam had broken. The community had seen what she was doing, and now they were asking questions she couldn't answer. The board called an emergency vote to open an internal investigation. Deborah objected, demanded it be delayed, but the members overruled her. She sat down silent as her power began slipping away in real time. When the meeting ended, neighbors came up to me one after another, thanking me, shaking my hand, some even apologizing for not speaking out sooner. They weren't afraid anymore, because now they knew. Deborah's power was built on silence and fear, and both had just run out. The next morning I woke up to a different kind of quiet. No letters taped to my door. No emails from the HOA. No veiled threats or warning memos on the board. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder, but that didn't mean it was over. I knew Deborah wouldn't give up that easily. She was quiet now, but I could feel it. The tension, the unfinished fight. And sure enough, by midweek, whispers started floating around. Deborah had been holding private meetings with certain board members, trying to win them back, promising reform and new leadership strategies if they stood by her, but most of them were smart enough to stay away. Too many people had seen the truth at that last meeting. Lisa and I pressed forward with the formal grievance. We sent letters to the HOA legal counsel, filed documentation with the county ombudsman, and requested public review of Deborah's decisions from the past 18 months. And as we did, more residents came forward. I wasn't ready for how many. Turns out Deborah had used her position to issue fines totaling over $11,000 in just under a year. Nearly all of it against the same group of residents. People who had questioned her, people she didn't like. People who, like me, simply didn't fit into her perfect little vision of Willow Creek. Worse, some of those fines had no digital record in the HOA system. Lisa looked up from the spreadsheet one evening and said flatly, "That's theft, Tom. If she's collecting payments outside the ledger and depositing them elsewhere, that's criminal." The board called another emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't just crowded, it was packed, standing room only. Word had spread. Even people who never attended anything HOA-related were there, arms crossed, waiting. Deborah walked in last, as always. But there was no confidence in her step now. She looked smaller, thinner, like the power she used to carry on her shoulders had evaporated. The board chair, Mark Palmer, who'd stayed neutral up until that point, stood up and cleared his throat. "Tonight we will be reviewing the grievance filed against HOA President Deborah Harper. We've received testimony from 23 residents, a formal legal complaint, and verified inconsistencies in violation records." He paused. "Ms. Harper, do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Deborah stood. For a second it looked like she might cry. "I have always acted in the best interest of this community," she said, voice trembling. "Sometimes that means making hard decisions. Not everyone is going to be happy about rules. That's the price of leadership." Mark didn't flinch. "The issue isn't enforcement, Ms. Harper. The issue is selective enforcement, manipulation, and misconduct." He turned to the rest of the board. "We'll now vote on immediate removal and permanent disqualification from HOA leadership." One by one, they raised their hands. It was unanimous. And just like that, Deborah Harper was no longer president of the HOA. The room stayed quiet for a moment. No cheering, no outbursts, just silence. And then, one by one, people began to stand. They didn't clap, they didn't jeer, they simply walked out. Calm, united, done. Outside, I stood by the sidewalk as people filed past. Susan came up to me and smiled. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did." That night, I sat in my garage alone. The poker table was still set up, cards stacked neatly in the center, a full circle from where it all started. I sent one message to the group chat. "Same time Thursday?" The responses came in fast. "Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. Bring your A game." And from Dan, the sheriff, "I'll bring the chips, both kinds." I closed the garage, turned off the lights, and finally allowed myself to exhale. The game was back on. Thursday night came, and with it, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Normalcy. The guys showed up like clockwork. Kevin brought his usual stale pretzels. Manny had a six-pack of root beer. Dan arrived last in uniform straight from work, carrying a giant plastic container of poker chips and a bag of barbecue chips, like he'd planned the joke all week. We played. We laughed. We told the same stories we'd told a dozen times before, and they were just as funny as the first. There was no tension, no lowered voices, no nervous glances at the clock. Just good friends around a table, enjoying the kind of night that used to be simple, before Deborah made it something else. But the biggest change wasn't inside the garage. It was what happened outside. Neighbors passed by and waved. Some slowed down to listen, maybe just to confirm the legend, the poker table that survived HOA war. A few even came up to the driveway to say hi. One guy, Paul, from 3 doors down, who never talked to anyone, brought over a thermos of coffee and said, "Just in case you're going long." And then Susan showed up. She stood in the doorway with a covered tray and said, "I heard you were playing again. I baked." Everyone turned as she peeled back the foil. "Brownies, still warm." "Legend," Ray whispered. And just like that, the garage wasn't just a place for cards anymore. It was a symbol of pushing back, of not giving in, of reclaiming something that shouldn't have been taken in the first place. We played until midnight. No police, no clipboard, no fines. The next morning, I took a walk around the block, not to check for notes or violations, just to enjoy the air. It felt different now. Lighter. Kids were playing in a front yard that used to be kept empty because Deborah didn't like unstructured activity. A couple was repainting their mailbox without a single HOA approval form in sight. People were living, and no one looked afraid anymore. Later that week, I got a call from Mark Palmer, the new interim HOA chair. He asked if I'd consider joining the board to help steer things in a better direction. I said no, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want the table to turn into a desk. I wanted to keep that garage open, for cards, for connection, for anyone who ever felt like they couldn't speak up. Some battles are fought in courtrooms, some at meetings. Ours was won with a full house and a tray of brownies, and we never folded.